We're lucky to be living in the 21st century, an era of incredible innovation and technology. Right now, as you watch this video, data is streaming across continents and oceans at unimaginable speeds, straight to your device. Just a few decades ago, this would have seemed impossible, or would it? In this video, we're diving into some of history's most astonishing ancient technologies, discoveries so advanced, they'll make you question what we really know about the past. You probably think of automatic doors as being a recent invention. After all, how would a door even know if we were there unless a pressure sensor was there to tell it or a camera picked us up? The answer, it would seem, lies in water pressure. Hero of Alexandria designed the world's first ever automatic doors 2,000 years ago, and water is at the heart of their design. You've heard the phrase smoke and mirrors before, but Hero's doors were more a case of steam and pulleys. A hollow ball would be filled with water with two tubes placed inside it. Below the ball was a cauldron, which had to be ignited by human hands to begin the heating process. As the air in the sphere heated up, the water was pushed out into a bucket, and the bucket pulled down a rope that then sequentially pulled open the doors. The only issue was that you'd have to know someone was coming in order to make the doors open for them. Otherwise, they'd be waiting a while. We're not the type of people who like to point at something seemingly miraculous and say, that was definitely aliens. But we do find ourselves looking at the genetic disc and thinking, okay, this might have been aliens. The Laydite carved disc, which is lightweight and not even a foot across, contains detailed carvings so intricate that you need a microscope to appreciate what they represent. Not only that, one side of the disc represents the birth process of a human being from sperm to fetus to egg. We have two major issues here. The first is that designing things at the microscopic level should be impossible without a microscope. The second is that such detailed information about the fetal process shouldn't have been available to humans when this disc was made 6,000 years ago. It was discovered in Colombia, but the style and design of the disc doesn't match that of any known pre-Columbian society. A snake is running around the outer edge of the disc, and there's a hole in the middle as if it were intended to be spun, like a vinyl record. Is it an elaborate fraud or the work of an advanced but now forgotten civilization of the past? There's no mysterious grand purpose to this next entry. It's just a particularly beautiful old automaton of the kind nobody seems to make anymore. In this case, it depicts an elephant and it's decked out in gold. This is the sort of thing that would make an ideal gift for a wealthy person, and it almost certainly did. The present owner of the piece is Waddesdon Manor, but they possess a detailed history of their unusual artifact. It was built to specification in London in 1768 by Hubert Martinet, who had a team of French craftsmen at his disposal. The bronze casting and the beautiful jewels which decorate the piece were all included there at the request of the purchaser. Many automatons, such as this and elephants in particular, were sent to Indians to help smooth over trade relationships. Negotiations between the French East India Company and the English East India Company were complicated. An incredibly beautiful elephant automaton was apparently just the thing to get everyone around the table to negotiate. The words death ray conjure up images from science fiction. They're the kind of weapons that aliens might use for attacks on humanity. But have humans already used such weapons centuries ago? Archimedes, who was born 2,200 years ago, had a pretty good design for a death ray. All it involved was a giant mirror and a vast parabolic disc, and according to his calculations, it would be possible to set enemy ships on fire using nothing other than the heat of the sun's rays. Did he ever build and use the weapon? We don't know, but there are a lot of vitrified forts in Scotland which are hard to explain any other way. Vitrification is the process of heating something up to such an extent that it turns into glass. Even stone can't survive. To vitrify a stone fort, a temperature of over 1,000 degrees centigrade would need to be applied consistently to an area for hours. A typical fire probably wouldn't be capable of doing it, but there are more than 60 forts in Scotland that appear to have been burned this intensely, including Cawdale Hill Fort and Topknot. Inside the British Museum, you'll find the Nemrud lens, which is also sometimes referred to as the layered lens. The word lens gives away its apparent purpose. It's a piece of glass that improves focus in the same way that glasses or a magnifying glass do. Some people even think it was built explicitly for this purpose. That would be pretty incredible when you take into account the fact that the lens is more than 3,000 years old. It's unlikely that the concept of treating people's vision problems would have occurred to anybody back then. So if this really is a lens, it was more likely to have been used for the purpose of starting fires. It's worth noting that not every expert who's assessed it believes that it had a practical purpose at all. The lens is made of rock crystal, which was a popular decorative material of the era, and so it may merely have been a piece of furniture or decoration. The fact that it can magnify things would therefore have to be considered an accident during the manufacturing process. The majority of people credit the invention of flying machines for human beings to the Wright brothers. We're not about to suggest that there were people living in South America over 1,500 years ago who also knew how to fly. But based on their carvings, it seems likely that they at least understood the basic principles of how to do it. The Kumbaya culture was exceptionally good with metalwork and making gold sculptures. And you've had a hard time trying to suggest that these sculptures, in particular, don't look like modern airplanes. You might try to write them off as representations of insects, as many historians have, but how many insects do you know that look like this? Researchers even made upscaled versions of the sculptures in the 1990s and proved that they were aerodynamically perfect. In other words, they're capable of flying and gliding. What would even have served as the inspiration for these miniature statues, if not planes? We have no idea, and sadly, we're never likely to find out. Debates about the nature of the infamous Klerksdorp spheres have raged on for years. Geologists insist that there's nothing mysterious about them at all, and they're the product of concretion happening in sedimentary rock over the course of millions of years. People who aren't satisfied with that explanation insist that there's no way that nature could create something that looks like a cricket ball without at least a little external help. If you've never seen one before, they're quite a remarkable thing to see. But miners in South Africa are so used to them that they collect them and bring them home from work as a token of a job well done. Despite their perfectly round shape and their unique appearance, all a Klerksdorp sphere really is, according to science, is a mixture of sediments of volcanic rock and ash, which have been weathered into their round shape by the elements. Is there something to be said for the conspiracy theorists who say that they found traces of metal inside the spheres? And they therefore can't be natural? Maybe, but maybe not. This is a carving known as the Dendra relief, although to many people it's known as the Dendra light bulbs. Located below the Temple of Hathor, the carvings certainly seem to depict ancient Egyptian figures holding something that looks out of place. Based on the shape alone, we'd say they were surfboards, which would be pretty weird. What about the shapes in the middle, though? Could they be filaments? If so, that might explain why there appear to be wires running away from the objects as if they were connected to a power supply. Simply put, a lot of people think that this carving is proof that the ancient Egyptians understood the concept of the electric light bulb. Egyptologists, however, insist that it's supposed to be a pair of serpents held aloft on the leaves of a lotus. We suppose that makes a lot more sense. No researcher, historian, or archaeologist has ever come up with a satisfactory explanation as to why the ancient Greeks possessed a device so advanced as the Antikythera mechanism. Only one item of this type has ever been found, and it turned up in a 2,000-year-old Greek shipwreck. We can't even agree on whether to describe it as the world's first ever computer or an incredibly advanced early calendar. Powered by a rudimentary form of clockwork, this device was able to accurately track the movement of stars and planets across the sky. Astrologists probably had a use for it, but its presence on a ship suggests that it may also have been valuable to navigators. If that were the case, though, wouldn't every ancient Greek ship have one? Why have we only ever found one? And why did the Greeks have a piece of technology so advanced for its era that nothing even close to this complex was invented for another 1,000 years after it was created? Do you remember what we all used to do before video games and the internet when we needed to entertain ourselves? If you're one of our younger viewers, then perhaps you don't. But our older viewers will. We used to sit around a table and play board games. That's a tradition that goes back centuries and can be traced all the way down the ages to the ancient Egyptians playing hounds and jackals. They probably didn't use that exact name for their game. It was decided upon by Howard Carter after he found a gaming set inside the tomb of Amenemhet IV. A more descriptive name for the game would be 58 holes, which tells you what the board looks like. Each player had 29 holes to monitor and was given a set of sticks. One player had dog-headed sticks, and the other had sticks topped by jackals. Gameplay wasn't drastically different from a more modern game of backgammon. In fact, backgammon may even have evolved from hounds and jackals. You might wonder why we're including a map in our video. After all, what could be remarkable about a map? Every major civilization has made use of maps since the dawn of time. In this case, the wonderment comes from what's on the map. This was the personal map of Piri Reis, a legendary admiral who served in Turkey's navy during the 16th century. It isn't a complete map of the world. Such knowledge wouldn't have been available back then, but there is something a little confusing on it. The map focuses on the areas of the sea which Reis crossed regularly. That means we can see Europe, North Africa, South America, and Antarctica. There can be no disputing that the coast of Antarctica is marked on the map. There's no other landmass that could hold this position. Why is this remarkable? Because the first recorded sighting of Antarctica happened in the 19th century, and Piri Reis drew his map in 1513. The Lycurgus cup would be considered beautiful no matter what period of history it had been built during. The fact that it's 1,600 years old just adds to the charm. Factor in the fact that it also appears to change color depending on the lighting conditions in the room at the time, and it becomes practically miraculous. This isn't a miracle, though, and nor is it a work of futuristic technology. It's simply a phenomenal piece of glasswork. The Lycurgus cup is made of dichroic glass, which works by accepting or reflecting light particles, and therefore appearing to be a different color depending on what type of light is shown at it and where that light comes from. Shine a light from behind the glass, and it appears to be red. Do the same thing from the front, and it's suddenly green. The ancient Romans wouldn't have had the first idea why dichroic glass worked the way that it did, but that didn't matter. It was enough for them to be able to see and understand that it worked, and they could make beautiful things with it. Have you ever heard anybody talk about their good old days when you didn't need to have a lock on your door because nobody would dream of entering your house and stealing anything? It's nonsense. People have always had locks on their doors. Even the ancient Egyptians had them 4,000 years ago, and they might date back even further. The Egyptian locks probably wouldn't stand up to a good hard shove or kick, though. They were made out of wood, as was the key. We imagine warping became something of an issue, as keys snapping off inside locks must also have been. The basic household Egyptian lock was a wooden bolt, above which was a slot that contained several drilled holes. A separate device secured to the door was full of pins, which fit into the holes, and therefore kept the door secured. The large, cumbersome wooden key would lift these pins out of the holes when it was turned inside the lock, and thereby open the door. Have you ever walked into a building, seen something like this on one of the walls, and dismissed it without pausing to wonder what it might be? It's not just there for decoration. It's a mural instrument. Any wall which bears a mural instrument has been built in perfect alignment with the meridian, which means the mural instrument can be used to track and chart the elevation of an object in the night sky. Sometimes their range of angles went from 0 degrees to 90 degrees, in which case they would be called a mural quadrant. Both the ancient Greeks and the ancient Egyptians used mural quadrants when conducting their own star charts, and the methodology remained popular for thousands of years. The legendary astronomer Edmund Halley, after whom the comet is named, had one installed for himself at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London, in 1725. There are even some still in use today, making them one of history's most enduring scientific inventions. Earlier on, we briefly mentioned astronomical clocks when we were discussing the astrolabe. But astronomical clocks are such striking inventions that they deserve to be mentioned in their own right. By definition, an astronomical clock is any clock that shows not only the time of day, but also further information that pertains to celestial objects. As an example, this might be the position of the sun and the moon, or the signs of the zodiac. As elaborate and aesthetically pleasing as astronomical clocks are, they're almost all wrong for the same reason that astrolabes are wrong. They place the Earth at the center of the universe. Nobody can say for sure when the first astronomical clock was developed, but it's known that Suzhong of China had a water-driven variant during the 11th century, and so the idea may have originated there. By the 1300s, they had become popular in Europe, and there are still some spectacular examples of centuries-old astronomical clocks still standing today. The one in the Old Town Square of Prague is a particularly fine example. If you're a fan of the type of music made by an organ, then you might be surprised to know that you're actually listening to a musical instrument that has its origins in the 3rd century. The world's first ever pipe organ was created by the inventor, Ctesibius of Alexandria, who named his invention hydraulis. As the name implies, water was involved in the process. The inventor had grown tired of attempting to play panpipes using mechanically generated wind. The hydraulis was a set of pipes standing on a wind chest, which was in turn linked up to a conical wind reservoir. The air would be supplied via a pair of pumps, and the chest would be filled with water to maintain air pressure, and thereby ensure consistency of sound. If air pressure dropped, the water rose up and compressed the air, and so the organ kept its volume. His initial invention relied on keys, but he also made models of the organ, which were played by a series of sliders, each of which would adjust the air pressure to create a new sound. This Chinese device looks like something mystical and ancient. One gets the impression from looking at it that if it were opened, evil spirits might escape. They won't though. In fact, you might find some nicely chilled ancient wine. Despite looking like a treasure chest, this is actually the world's first refrigerator unit. The ancient Chinese were very big on the ideal of not allowing their wine to get too warm during hot summer months, and so this was their solution to the problem. It's called a xian, and it's made from bronze. Inside it are 2 layers, with a gap between the layers stuffed full of ice to keep everything else inside nice and cold. The oldest one archaeologists have found so far dates back almost 2,500 years. They were such a strong idea and so good at their job that alternative methods of refrigeration weren't even considered until the 17th century, and there isn't a plug, socket, or 6-month-old packet of cheese in sight. For as long as human beings have existed, they've been fascinated by the night sky. We know more about the nature and movement of the stars and objects above us than our ancient ancestors did, but that doesn't mean they didn't come up with some pretty sophisticated ways to try to make sense of them. One such example is known as the armillary sphere. The star tracking device is so old that even the record of its invention has been lost to time, but most experts think that the first one was made by Greek philosopher Anaximander of Miletus somewhere around 2,500 years ago. It's also known that Hipparchus had one 2,200 years ago, and so did various people in China at about the same time. The designs change a little from location to location, but the basic principle is always the same, a series of rings around a globe, showing the predicted path of objects in the night sky at different times in the year. Some were more accurate than others. For example, the Earth was often depicted as the center of the universe, which is clearly inaccurate. The only thing we're able to tell you for sure about these strange ancient dodecahedrons is that the ancient Romans really liked them. We know that because we found so many of them when excavating ancient Roman cities and towns. More than 100 examples of them have been discovered so far, more often than not inside Roman shipwrecks. Their design also changed over time. In the early days, they were stone, but later versions were made out of bronze. Their presence on so many sunken ships suggests that they might have had a nautical use, but the truth is we simply don't know. They might have been ornate candle holders. They might have been a form of a child's toy or a purpose in some long-forgotten ancient Roman gambling game which kept troops amused on long journeys by sea. If you think you have a better answer, please be sure to let us know by leaving your thoughts down in the comments. Unlike some of the ancient technologies we've discussed so far, the Iron Pillar of Delhi isn't hidden away in a museum or kept out of sight. It would be hard to hide it anywhere. It's 22 feet tall, and as it's made of iron, it's very heavy. The mystery of its technology isn't the fact that it's an iron pillar. Even though it's 1,500 years old, creating gigantic works of steel was possible for the people of the time. The mystery is why it isn't showing any signs of rust or weathering when all of the much younger buildings and structures around it do. The answer might be twofold. The first is that the pillar, which is correctly known as the Ashoka Pillar, is astonishingly pure. The composition is more than 98% iron. Those ancient Indian steel workers did an incredible job. It also has an accidental coat of rust-proofing. Experts believe the pillar was welded inside a coal furnace, but that a freak chemical combination inside the furnace caused by moisture, slag, and lime resulted in a layer of misohite coating the pillar. Every time your phone battery runs low, and you wonder why people haven't invented more effective, long-lasting batteries by this point in time, stop and think about the fact that someone in the land, now known as Iraq, might have been expressing very similar thoughts about batteries more than 2,000 years ago. The Baghdad batteries, as they are now known, were unearthed in the country way back in 1838, completely baffling the archaeologists who discovered them. Some people refuse to accept the idea that they're batteries, but what else could they be? They're clay jars, each of which contains a rod of iron which has been deliberately wrapped in copper. One of the researchers involved in the discovery recreated the batteries under laboratory conditions to see if they would be capable of generating and holding a current of electricity, and they did. The existence of the Baghdad batteries is a scientific fact. So what was it that our ancestors were powering with them 2,200 years ago? The precise meaning of the Hittite sun disk is a secret that's been lost to time for even longer than their civilization was. What we can say with some degree of certainty is that the Anatolian symbol was regularly used in religious ceremonies and burials as many as 2,500 years ago. There are 4 different types of the Hittite sun disk, possibly signifying the kind of ceremony they were being used for. The most common comes in the shape of a semicircle. But there are also diamond-shaped discs, circular variants, and a second semicircular design, which features bull's horns and various animal designs. They might have signified the power or wealth of an individual. 13 of the examples found so far have come from inside royal tombs. Ankara University, which uses the sun disk as their symbol, say that it actually predates the Hittites, and that usage of the symbol can be tracked back over 4,000 years. The circle always represents either the sun or the earth. The horns at the top symbolize fertility, and the birds represent freedom. Haiti kings were typically buried with 4 or 5 identical sun disks. If you were an explorer in the ancient world, you wouldn't dream of leaving home without your astrolabe. The device is an inclinometer capable of discerning altitude and angles of slope or elevation. That doesn't just mean the altitude or elevation of the person holding the device. It could also mean an object in the sky, such as a planet or star. Every major historical civilization on Earth appears to have independently developed its own version of the astrolabe, from the Europeans during the Middle Ages to the Islamic Golden Age. The earliest record of such a device that we can find comes from a Hellenistic era, where it's claimed that Hipparchus invented one roughly 2,100 years ago. The basic principles of the astrolabe would later go on to be used in the creation of astronomical clocks, which in real terms are just massive clockwork astrolabes, using the same basic methodology to work out the relative positions of the sun, the moon, and all known planets. Here's another remarkable invention of the Chinese, a basic precursor to the compass, which they started using during the 3rd century and carried on using until the 13th century. The most remarkable thing about it is that it didn't contain any magnets at all. This tool, known as the south-pointing compass, wasn't intended to be the only way for the ancient Chinese to find their way. It was simply a helpful guide. The owner of the south-pointing chariot would simply set the pointing hand of the sculpture due south at the start of the journey, and a series of differential gears inside the device meant that no matter how many times the owner turned and changed direction during their journey, the device would continue pointing south. The style and design of the chariots changed considerably over the years, but various still existing ancient Chinese texts tell us much about their internal mechanisms. They weren't always accurate because they were prone to error by the human operator, but they were light years ahead of anything else that was available as a navigational aid at the time of their invention. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching and see you soon.